Yesterday's story on Monday Night Football. Craig and Paul, we have a three-way text at times that usually is about guests and maybe some other sports news that we look at and the possibility of segments. And then yesterday it started to, the murmur about what was going on. I had the game on. I was not paying a lot of attention to it and just wondered if maybe somebody had done something that was an injury that we see a lot in pro sports. And then, of course, the story turned completely different, and one that just absolutely encapsulated the entire sports world and the nation on Damar Hamlin, who is right now still in critical condition. We'll read a statement in a moment from the family, but we have seen players go down. We've seen, carts come out. We've seen players who have had some spinal injuries. We've seen a lot of that. I don't know if we have ever, in football reasons or football, stories, seen what we saw last night with Damar Hamlin.
No, it was very tragic and bizarre. And, I think the thing that scares the entire football watching public is, it's been over a half a day now since it happened and we don't know anything. So I'm hoping that means that that's good news and that eventually Damar Hamlin will be out of the woods. But it's just really scary and just, not knowing anything. I can't imagine what it's like to be a member of his family, a member of the Bills, a member of the Bengals who had to sit there and see it last night. Just really, really hard. Knowing how hard it was for all of us to have to watch it, and none of us know Damar Hamlin or anything like that. It's just tragic to see someone go through that, especially while they're living their dream.
Yeah, it was scary stuff. It was frightening to see, that occur and, to not have any clue why or how or, what was to come. For all we knew, that was going to be, a death announcement at some point on SportsCenter. That could have very well been that. I think, the hardest part that people are having to deal with is that reality's been smashed. And reality's actually set in of like, oh, wow, this probably should happen way more given the game that's being played. And we're very fortunate that it hasn't probably happened, instances like that before or on a more regular basis. We have no idea what's the cause. People were so quick to put their agendas out there on whatever they thought the cause was going to be. It was just kind of sickening. Like, let's just breathe and acknowledge this man in, an obvious state of health crisis and then worry about the details later. And so now I think we're all curious about the details just to simply have an explanation for why this happened and what could possibly have caused this, whether it be an underlying heart issue, which we've seen in sports before, or whether it be, I don't know, something to do with head and it's anyone's guess at this point. That's why it's probably not good to guess at all. But I think everybody's absolutely curious on what could possibly have gone wrong because, none of us have ever seen this thing before. So I think reality has set in of like, oh, wow, this is a very dangerous game. And we know that and we say that, but when you go and you watch it and there's like 10 games on every weekend and nothing really ever happens to that extent, week after week after week after week, and then all of a sudden it does happen. Like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. It's like, really? I can't believe it hasn't happened way more often, quite honestly, with you. And still not knowing exactly what caused it. Might not have been anything football related. It might have been some underlying health thing, as I said a moment ago. So yeah, it was frightening to watch that unfold. It was a bit bizarre because it didn't feel sort of real there at times. Just how quiet that stadium was, the scrambling of the ESPN's broadcast to try and, fill time, quite frankly, and also figure out some answers as well as best they could. And I think that that was a lesson for a lot of people on the ESPN side of things of, I was just shocked that they just left. Like, they kept just going to their announcers, just like telling them to, basically keep talking. It's like, what do you say? Like, after a little while, if you're Joe Buck, like, what do you possibly say? If you're Susie Colbert, they keep going back to you in the studio, and it's very clear Booger doesn't have anything to say. Like, I wouldn't have been able to fill airtime because I would have just been like, well, what do you say to this? But they just kept going to him, so I give a lot of credit to the media folks who had to sit there and go on camera in that moment and talk somehow or another. And credit to the medical staff for hopefully being quickly acting enough to have prevented an even far greater tragedy. But, yeah, it's got everybody's head spin, got everybody feeling weird, and we're all just I think hopeful that this turns out to be a happy ending, even though it's still obviously touch and go on as far as the news and as far as his condition goes.
S. Michael DeHart on the chat room, and a lot of you are giving your information of what you have experienced. S. Michael DeHart, it gets your attention in a hurry, no kidding. I've been on a couple of SCAs, sudden cardiac arrest due to trauma. So, Mike, ask Michael if you want to kind of give us a couple of analogies or at least an idea of what it was, what created it, what caused it. We will have today Dr. Neelish Goswami. He's going to be with us, interventional cardiologist, director of cardiac cath lab at Baylor Scott & White Hillcrest here in Waco, and he will join us to kind of give us an idea. I contacted Matt Rohr, who is like high up the chain, like really high up the chain at Baylor Scott & White, Southwest Sports Medicine, and also a sponsor of this show. And he said, I have the perfect guy for you, as they were trading text yesterday in the evening. I thought that what they did initially, it was kind of like treading water. And then I thought when they brought in Ryan Clark and Scott Van Pelt and even Troy Aikman or even Booker McFarland, I thought at least they could start to give us a little bit of an idea of what it's like to be a player on the field. And, you know, they do play a game that's very violent. But I'm trying, I cannot believe, I was trying to think of an example of this, and I don't want to bring it up, but I guess the only one where I've ever seen anybody just collapse on the court was when Hank Gathers collapsed.
Yeah, that's
at
what
Loyola Marymount. And, of course, there was a lot of hidden issues with him, but at the same time, that's what reminded me of that. Thank God we haven't seen it very often, if at all.
Well, with I really appreciate, like, Ryan Clark was the best person to have available for that because, you know, it's a perspective of his situation where he collapsed on the field, had nothing to do with a collision or anything like that. Although, we don't really know if the collision, caused Damar Hamlin's, if it was all part of it. Like, that's all going to come out later on. But Ryan Clark has sickle cell trait. So he has sickle cell anemia. And because of that, I mean, he had that, incident in Denver where he, had to cling to his life for a little while. And then the story about Mike Tomlin, I thought was really telling, in that he said, look, the way that he was saying, look, the way players approach this game, you want to play. He's like, I had my wife in the room. I had all these doctors. And after 5 minutes, Mike Tomlin said, no, if you were my son, you're not going to go play in that game. He said, sometimes you have to have that. I thought that was a really good story.
Ryan Clark actually said he was relieved that Tomlin said what he said.
But on Damar Hamlin, we just don't know. That's the thing. It's whole hard to talk about because we only know what happened and what they've told us since then, which is one sentence about him, essentially.
Yeah, like we know nothing. We know nothing of the details. We don't know if it's heart. We don't know if it's brain. We don't know if we have no idea. And that's what's hard to kind of wrap your head around. It reminded me of the Owen Hart thing. And I know that's what a lot of people eventually brought up, which I guess is one of the more neat aspects of social media, is that, you do have people who kind of have the same ideas or the same thoughts that cross during various moments. And so I was sitting there thinking, like, this reminds me of Owen Hart. And sure enough, like, Owen Hart started trending like within 20 or 30 minutes because a lot of other, I guess, old wrestling fans had the same thought of watching the Over the Edge pay-per-view back in the late 90s. And they were broadcasting from Kansas City, and Owen Hart donned in the blue blazer attire, his alter ego, is rappelling from the rooftop, and it wasn't secure. Like there eventually ended up being a multi-million-dollar lawsuit over the people who rigged it up, the apparatus to come down from the ceiling, and that was not done properly, and ended up some release that was not supposed to released him in midair basically, and he fell from a very high point in the arena. And Jason King actually was there. Buddy Jason King was there at Kempner Arena. And Owen Hart fell from a very high spot and ended up, colliding with the turnbuckle and bouncing off of that. And ended up basically dying in the ring, but officially pronounced dead a little while later. And that was a horrific deal. And we didn't even see nearly nearly any of the amount that we saw. Like, you saw replays of him collapsing over and over again, Hamlin. Like, you didn't see any of the Owen Hart thing. It wasn't on camera. They were doing like a promo at the time, and then they just came back to the ring, and you're like, wait, something's wrong. Why is it so quiet? And you see people kind of gathered, and that was the extent of it. Whereas with Hamlin, you saw the replay on Twitter. If you wanted to go watch it right now, you could watch it 1,000 times and watch every reaction and watch everything like that. Point being is they're in the middle of a pay-per-view, and it's like, what do you do? Guy just had this massive accident. Doesn't happen very often ever in the ring. And what do you do? And they went on with the show. The show must go on, Vince McMahon said, basically. And before the show even ended that night, Jim Ross is on there pronouncing Owen Hart, or letting the audience know Owen Hart had passed away from the fall. And they just finished it. And I think that memory really came to me because I'm like, what do you do if you're those NFL execs or the ESPN execs and that suddenly happens and nobody's obviously expecting? I feel like last night, they were waiting for Scott Van Pelt to get to the studio just to finally move into Sports Center, move into a different thing other than, hey, Joe and Troy, tread water, and then every once in a while I'll throw it to the studio and what was it, Susie Colbert, and let them tread
Adam
water.
Schefter and
Booger, and let them tread water. And they just kept throwing it back to each other over and over again, and nobody knew what to say. And so they stopped the show, and I was thankful that they did because it made me think of WWE just pushing through. And still to this day, people who were around at that time, I think they just had that mindset back then of the show must go on, like I said. But I think now, all these years removed from it, everybody that was back then, around then, would have said, yeah, the NFL made the right call in canceling that. And it felt like they were going to try and push through at points. And I just felt like there's just no way you could have played that game after that occurred. And so I'm glad to see that they eventually came to the determination that they did. And obviously, we still don't know the extent of really anything involving last night, from the injury to that game. And obviously that's the least important thing.
No, it is. And there's no plans on what to do with that game. That game is irrelevant, even though it is important as far as what happens, whoever gets to what seed. Right now, the most important thing is on Damar Hamlin. Here's the statement from the family. On behalf of our family, we want to express our sincere gratitude for the love and support shown to Damar during his challenging time. We are deeply moved by the prayers, kind words, donations from fans around the country. We'll get to that. We also want to acknowledge the dedicated first responders and healthcare professionals, University of Cincinnati Medical Center, who provided exceptional care for Damar. We feel so blessed to be part of the Bills, have their support. Also want to thank Coach Taylor and the Bengals for everything they've done. Your generosity and compassion mean the world to us. Please keep Damar in your prayers. We will release updates as soon as we have them. Thank you, the Hamlin family. Now, you've heard about his charitable work for underprivileged and those who, kids, had $2,500 as a goal. Paul, what is it now that the toy drive is, the Chasing M's Foundation Community Toy Drive?
It's $4.7 million and will probably only keep going. And one of the things Scott Van Pelt mentioned last night was, the people of Buffalo. I got to tell you, the last month I've been, and you kind of know this about places like that, but the city of Buffalo kind of understands community better than most cities. And it's a big city. It's not just some, kind of big city. And it's the second largest city in New York. And because they have to go through snow drifts and blizzards and the things like they've gone through, they have this unbelievable sense of community. So when bad things happen, they really come together and come out in force, man. If you are from Buffalo, New York, and you're a part of this and supporting, hats off to you, because the way that city does community better than most in the country is very impressive.
This morning and really overnight, numerous stories about, okay, so who is Damar Hamlin? Yes, he plays for the Buffalo Bills. He played at the University of Pittsburgh and wanted to play nearby so people would be proud of the Pittsburgh football team. He was asked, this is Henry McKenna, is I think the tweet, he was asked about what's important to him aside from football.
The only thing I could think of saying right now is I'm big on family. I'm big on my family unit. My mom, my dad, my little brother, that's pretty much my whole world. Outside of any other thing going on, my life revolves around them. I don't really do too much without my mom and dad's opinion. Whether I take it or whether I don't, but sometimes I just want to hear it, It's just how I was raised, and that's just something I'm big on, so that's all. I would say family.
All right, so that's it. To get to know him, and of course, a lot of people just knew maybe he was the defensive back, played for the Buffalo Bills, right? Former Pittsburgh player, and now, of course, his name is everywhere with all the different shows trying to get to know a little bit more about him as he clings to life at the hospital in Cincinnati. Dr. Neil.